Welcome to Age Lust, a podcast where we share uninhibited stories about aging, desire, and wisdom. We focus on quality of life issues like sex, hormones, and the messiness of getting older and anything and everything you might consider TMI. I'm your host, Jessica Podonsky, a double board certified family nurse practitioner and menopause provider. I'm passionate about creating a community where we talk about embracing our gray hair, or even waxing it off down there, and how you're never too old to get an STI. And if you do, write me and we'll talk about it. While I am a medical professional, I am not your medical professional. Always consult with your healthcare team before making any changes. Okay, hey, how you doing? Welcome back to Age Lust. We are going to be talking about reinvention. Whether it's a new haircut, a career pivot, you decide that you're going to leave everything, move to ashram. Think that there are two messages that we get. One that is you should have your shit together and not need to reinvent. And the other is you need a makeover. And we're going to call it a midlife crisis. And what happens is that we end up putting more pressure on ourselves instead of taking the pressure off, even though we're already feeling so much pressure. So in today's episode, we are going to talk about reinvention and why it's another form of pressure. We're going to talk about how subtle changes can be powerful and what happens when you start to make those changes and people are like, you've changed, and they may not think it's very positive. So, I don't know, reinvention, is it bullshit? So when we're kids, we go through reinvention all the time. It is expected. We go from being elementary school to being preteens, in middle school to being high schoolers to young adults, trying to figure everything out in our 20s, and we think about ourselves in our 50s, or we look at people in their 50s and we think, like, why are they a mess? Why don't they have their shit together? And then when we're in our 50s, we look at people in their 70s and think, are you fucking kidding? They still don't have their stuff together? Obviously, that's not everyone. That's not the rule. But we are constantly reinventing ourselves and changing and adapting and getting clearer. But the thing is that in midlife, we call that a midlife crisis. And in that midlife crisis, we believe that we need drastic changes to find ourselves again. We need a new look, a new job, a new relationship. But I think that reinvention is misunderstood and more like boundaries. And in fact, boundaries can be that reinvention. So what do I mean by boundaries? I was listening to a podcast recently and they were talking about boundaries, and the podcast host was naming her boundaries. I need to have bed made and I need this and I need that. Those weren't really boundaries. Those were rules. And boundaries, what I'm learning, are something that's internal. In fact, nobody needs to know what your boundaries are, right? They have, that's just this internal dialogue that says, this is what I can tolerate, and you can do whatever you need to do. But internally, if you cross that line, my response is going to be this. So, for example, you know that your partner drinks too much or acts like an asshole if they have alcohol. You know you're going to the party, and you know if they take 3 drinks, like, they're a fucking mess. So your internal boundary is, if they take 2 drinks, I'm going to kiss them, tell them I love them, and say, I'll meet you back at home. I don't know if that would work or not. I mean, I guess it depends on where you live and how they're going to get home. And I'm overthinking that shit, right? But there's no drama. There's no screaming. There's no nothing. That's the boundary. In order for you to stay safe, you need to take those actions for yourself. I think the same thing can happen with reinvention. It can be subtle. I think in pop culture, the depiction of people in midlife is that they buy a sports car, they get a younger partner, they, decide that they're going to start that band again. They start a fucking podcast. And then reinvention equals crisis. Anyway. And we feel like we need to make these grand gestures in order to shake shit up. And the people around us don't really take to it too kindly. But what if the crisis was just a moment of reflection? And instead of hitting like the reset button and rebooting the whole system, we need to pause. Because I wonder if like Instagram and all the shit, TikTok and all of that just makes this whole thing worse. It gives us that FOMO. It gives us this thing of, well, if she's doing it, why can't I? But really what we need is just to pause and get clear on what small shifts we can make. Maybe it's our mindset. Maybe it's how we use our time. Maybe it's how we interact with people or the outside world. It's almost like real growth comes from small, quiet steps. But I have to tell you, I'm not a quiet, small step person. Like, that is my reinvention, to be quiet. For me, my new practice has been exercising in the bed before I exercise. So it's like curling up, bringing my knees to my chest and doing these leg crazy exercises, while I'm still laying down, and doing those every single day. I mean, that's not like an Instagram moment, right? To have me like bringing my knees to my chest and like flailing my legs in the air. But it's a subtle change that makes it easier for me to get up, get my blood moving, and get started. And maybe it's that saying no. Again, nobody's going to get on Instagram. I'm sure somebody's going to get on Instagram and be like, this is my year of no. And they're going to be like, look at all the, follow me today as I show you all the ways that I've said no. I don't know. Maybe somebody's going to do that. When I think about subtle changes and I think about reinvention, I also think about people being stuck. So my prejudice, of course, was when I was running groups for people over 60 around sex and sexuality. So I'd run these groups. And I was always just shocked that the people in their 70s were going through the same shit that they were going through when they were in their teens and 20s. So an example is that one of the women that came, she was in her 70s and she really had a crush on this guy. He was 92, but he was a player and she knew that he wanted to have sex. But, he was a player. And I think that, like, because I have no filter sometimes, I looked at her and I said, what are you going on about? She's like, I don't want to sleep with him because I think he's not, I want like exclusive. I want to have, I want us to go, I want to be the girlfriend and I don't want him to see other women and all this. And I was like, well, you're not going to get pregnant or anything. Like, what are we worried about? It was rude on my part. But then I think about another couple, and I've mentioned her before, where she had spent her whole life caring for her mother and never had a relationship, never had sex with anybody but herself, if she did that at all. But at the age of 50, her mother had died. and she had this sexual awakening. She met someone, had amazing orgasms, soaked the bed. That gave us an opportunity to talk about squirting. And that change, a drastic change, right, being, I guess, released from caretaking, allowed her to reinvent herself as a sexual being. I don't know. I also think about movies, and I think about the messages again that we get, like Rick Springfield, Jesse's Girl. I think he was a soap opera guy. And if you don't know, then you're young and whatever. I don't know. Or you don't live in the States, which is fine. You can think of so many actors who became singers and models who became actors. And there's a prejudice, like, stay in your lane. Why are you doing that? And then there are other movies. Excuse me. Oh, like The Devil Wears Prada, with this whole ugly duckling thing. I remember as a kid watching a movie with Stockard Channing. I think that was the person who played Rizzo in Grease with John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. Anyway, this movie was like an old movie when I saw it on TV. And she was like chunky and in college, and nobody liked her. She didn't have friends. She didn't have a boyfriend. And then she goes and has plastic surgery. Comes back and people are hitting on her, and she's so beautiful. She's got all these friends. And there's this one scene where she convinces the cheerleader who's been dumb and mean to her, to do flip-flops down the hall, and then she flies out of the window. And in fact, I think these kind of ugly duckling, like this just fucking occurred to me. I think this may be why I don't wear makeup. I don't know why. I got to work on that. I got to figure that out. But the thing is, when we change things like our looks, our hair, where we live, we haven't changed the core of who we are. Like, you're still there. It doesn't change who you are. Like, getting a new wardrobe doesn't cure loneliness or shyness. Not to say it can't help. I think that for me, not wearing makeup it's a time thing, honestly. And also, it's this is who I am. Take it or leave it. I don't know. I just wanted to talk about reinvention and the idea that it could be these subtle times. I mean, think about the time that you may have reinvented yourself in subtle ways, the small changes, and then question what made you want to make those changes if they're big or small? What made you feel like you needed to reinvent? Was it outside pressure? Was it an internal dissatisfaction? And could smaller steps have helped to get you to where you wanted? Like the idea of boundaries. I don't think that real change comes from snapping out of your life and like swapping out your whole wardrobe or swapping, everything. I think it can for some people, especially if they're like living their truth. But I think for most people, it's the subtle shifts. It's the slow and steady. And that's kind of where that magic happens. I don't know. What do you think? If you've reinvented yourself in dramatic ways, if you've embraced subtle change, I would love to hear about it. And yeah. Or if you've witnessed somebody make changes and you thought, that fucking old fool. Or you thought, that is incredible. I want to know, like, how did that go? All right. This was a short one. Take care. Until next time. If this podcast is helping you, please subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a review. You can write in with questions at hello@ageless.co, and I'll answer them on the podcast. If you want clarity on your aging journey, you can book a private session with me on my website, ageless.co. That's AGELUST.co. We're on all the podcast platforms as well as YouTube and Instagram. Links are in the show notes.